Hey everyone, today we're diving into Dart, a modern programming language that's clean, simple, and powerful. If you're into app development, especially with Flutter, the Dart is your new best friend. Dart is a general-purpose language developed by Google. It's designed to be easy to learn, super fast, and optimized for building modern apps, especially UI-heavy ones like mobile applications, web apps, and even desktop applications. Why should you learn Dart? Here's why Dart is a big deal. Flutter uses Dart. So if you want to build mobile apps for both Android and iOS, Flutter is awesome and Dart is the language behind it. It has a clean syntax, looks a lot like JavaScript or Java, so if you've done any of that before, you'll feel right at home. Also, it's cross-platform, so you have to write once, run anywhere on mobile, web, desktop. Dart can be used for mobile apps via Flutter, web development, backend or server-side applications, command line tools, and even desktop applications like we mentioned before. Here's a fun fact. Dart was actually created to fix some of the problems with JavaScript, especially for big projects. It got strong typing, OOP support, and still keeps things simple and readable. So what are you waiting for? Without wasting time, let's start learning. Alright guys, just a quick note before we move on. There are already tons of videos on YouTube showing you exactly how to install Dart and Flutter, so we're not gonna waste time on that here. Just go search it, follow the steps, and get it set up. Remember, right now you're a student, and part of being a good student is knowing how to figure things out on your own. Once you've done Dart installed and ready, come back here and we'll continue learning together. Alright, before we actually start coding in Dart, let's quickly set up everything we need. First, make sure you have Visual Studio Code or VS Code installed. It's one of the best editors for Dart and Flutter development, super lightweight, fast, and beginner-friendly. Now let's install the Dart extension. Just open the extension tab on the left side of your Visual Studio Code, search for Dart, and hit install. That's it, super simple. Make sure Dart is properly installed on your system and Visual Studio Code can detect it. If there's any issue, VS Code will usually show you a little warning at the bottom. So you have to press Ctrl-Shift-P to open up this menu, and after that, select Console Application for creating a Dart console application, and after selecting that, choose the destination you want to place your project, and after that you have to choose a name for your project. Right now for this section I'm gonna choose a name, and you can choose any name that you want, so I'm just going to use my Dart CLI app or CLI application, and actually it takes a while to create our project for us. So like you see here, the project has been created successfully and ready to use. Alright, that's all for the setup part. Let's jump into some real Dart coding now and have fun with it. Okay, so now that everything's set up, let's talk a little bit about the basic structure of our Dart CLI project. When you create a new Dart project using the command line, like we've done here, you'll see a few folders and files automatically created for you. Let me quickly walk you through them. So first, we've got the bin folder. This is the main entry point of your application. There's usually a file inside it called our project name.dart, like you see here, and that's where our program starts running. So you can think of it like the main file in the other programming languages. Next, there's the lib folder or lib folder. Now this one's super important for when your project grows bigger, so you can use it to organize your code, functions, and classes like you see here, and features that you want to keep separated from the main logic, like the multiplication that we saw earlier. Basically, it keeps your code clean and modular. Think of it as your code library. And after that, we have another directory that let's just remove everything, and for now testing our application. And like you see here, we have a function. We will cover what function actually is in Dart. So we remove all the functions that we had here, and right now you can see here we have the test folder. This is where your tests go. So if you're writing unit test or any kind of automated test, right now or later, they're live here and you can use it. Here's a tiny piece of Dart code to show you how it looks like. So here we're going to use void main double parentheses, and inside that we will open up two brackets, and inside those brackets in this function we're going to print hello world. So let's have a quick explanation. What is void main? This is the starting point of every Dart application, and inside this starting point we have a function that called print. So let's first of all ask ourselves a question. What is print? This is how you print something on the screen, like console.log in JavaScript or print in Python if you know anything about them. The print function is super basic but super useful. It lets you show messages in terminal. So if you're coming from JavaScript, it's like console.log, or it's like the print in Python if you come from Python, or if you don't know anything, I explain what actually it is. So whatever you put inside those codes, Dart will print it on the screen when your application is running. So you can try changing the text inside it, like let's just use hello world here. And if we run our application just right now, you can see in the terminal, it just printed hello world for us, and it's pretty awesome. So yeah, that's your first Dart program. Super simple, right? Alright, now let's talk about the variables in Dart. What's a variable? Think of it as a little box in memory where you store stuff like a name, a number, or even just true or false values. Start with a variable. Let's create a variable and break the code to see what actually happened inside these codes. So right now here we want to create a new variable using the var or var keyword. Right now we give it a name like name, so we have a variable with value of Taha, and the name of that variable is name, and at the end of this line we have to add a semicolon. Actually, here's we're saying, hey Dart, create a variable called name and put the value Taha inside it. We used the keyword var here, which means Dart will automatically figure out the type for us. Since Taha is a string, Dart knows that the name variable is a string. Now, let's declare another variable here. Okay, so imagine we want to create a variable that stores or holds just numeric values for us. In this scenario, this time, we're being a bit more specific. We're telling Dart the variable age will always hold an integer, and the value is 21. Pretty simple. Then, we maybe want to just store string values inside our variable, so we have to define the type of it at the first, and then choose a name and give it just a string values. If we don't give it a string value, we saw an error inside our code. And as you know, at the end of each Dart code, we have to add the semicolon. Okay, so what about the bool? Bool is short of boolean. This type only has two positive values, true or false. Here, we're saying Taha is happy, okay, or is a student. And right now, we give it a default value like false, and that means he's not a student right now. Okay, so that was the different type of variables in Dart programming language. Right now, we want to talk about two keywords for our variables, two keywords that is actually final and constant. When we give a final keyword to a specific variable, that means the value of that variable can be changed after a set. But what about the const? When we give it a const keyword to a variable like gravity, that means that this variable must be initialized or must be known at the compile time, and it cannot, and the value of that variable cannot be changed when it runs or when it compiles. Easy, right? So remember, var lets Dart guess the type, and if we define the type for each variable, like int is for whole numbers, and we tell Dart that this variable must just hold numeric values, and bool is for true or false stuff. And you can use print to see the variables or the value inside the variables at any time. For example, right now we're just created a variable called name with value of Sarah, age of 20, and a boolean variable called is happy and a default value of true. So that means Sarah is 20 years old and she's right now happy, fortunately, and we can print the value of each variable at any time. Right now we can just give the variable name inside the print function, and we can see the value and the result inside these functions as easy as possible. Okay, so we'll talk more about string, numbers, and booleans in detail later, but for now, this is great to start and understanding how Dart handles variables. Alright, let's talk about string interpolation in Dart. So what is that? It's just a fancy way of saying how to put variables inside a string without doing a bunch of plus signs. So first of all, let me show you what I mean. So we'll start by actually a messy example. So here I'm going to define some variables like name and age. So those variables define my identity, for example, my name and my age, and I want to print them in the terminal. So I have to use the print function, and here I'm going to say my name is and outside those codes, I have to add plus to add a variable. And right now I'm saying my name is name, which is actually Taha, and I am actually 20 years old, so I have to use the age variable, but I'm going to use a numerical variable inside the print function, so I have to change it to string using the toString function inside Dart SDK. So when I convert my numeric variable age to string, right now I can see printed, the result is printed, and my name is Taha and I am 21 years old, and exactly like this. So this is actually the messy way, but if you want to do it too much better, we can make it too much pretty, and instead of doing this messy thing, we can just say print, for example, my name is $name and I am $age years old. We just use the $sign symbol and drop the variable right inside the string. So whenever you put $sign and the variable name inside the string, Dart will automatically replace it with the actual value inside it. So if I run and see the result, yeah, you see there's no difference, and this is the pretty way of doing such a thing in Dart programming language. Very easy. Hey there, in this section we're going to talk about something that confuses a lot. For the beginners, let's ask ourselves a question. What's the difference between final and const in Dart? Don't worry, it's actually pretty simple. So let's start with final. Actually, when you declare a variable with final, it means you can set its value only once. After that, you cannot change it, like this. So here we're going to declare a variable called name and give it a value, and we want to start changing the value of that variable. For example, we want to change the value of name variable from Sarah to Taha, and like you see here, we have an error. But in const, if we actually going to declare a variable, okay, so const is also a variable, so you cannot change, but there's one big difference. A const value is known at compile time. It has to be something that never changes and is fixed when your program starts, okay? For example, we have declared a variable called current time, and we give it a value from the datetime package, and it automatically receives the actual time. And so the actual time is obviously every milliseconds or every seconds gonna be changed, and the final variable could be declared once and change one more time. But if we want to declare a current time variable and give it a value from the datetime.now package from the datetime class with the now method inside it, we'll receive an error because the constant value should be the value of the constant value should be known at the compile time, and the value of it cannot be changed. It has to be something that never changes. For example, the variable p will never changes, and that's alright. This is allowed. And also for the final current time variable, this is allowed because the datetime.now gives you a value at runtime, and that's okay for final. But this won't work for the constant because Dart is like, hey, I don't know what time is during at the compile time. So here's a quick summary for you. So we have to use final when the value won't change, but it might be set at runtime. We have to use const when the value never changes, and Dart know it before running the code. So most of the time you'll use final, and const is more strict, and you'll use it when you're sure the value is constant, like for config values or numbers or UI stuffs in Flutter, and etc. So that's it. Nice and easy, right? In the next video, we'll play around with lists and how to store multiple values inside a single variable. So stay tuned and let's keep going. Alright, welcome back. In this video, we're going to talk about lists in Dart. So what's a list? A list is just a collection, and think of it like a box that holds multiple values, not just one. So for example, let's say we want to store a few names, and here we're going to create a list to store all the names. For example, we want to create a variable called names, and inside that we defined some names like Sarah, and for example we can define another name like Ali, and also we can define a name called Alex. Pretty cool, right? And we can print that list that we created here. Okay, so if I just put the name of our list inside the object that we want to print in the print function, we can see the list of all the names that we have defined earlier. Okay, so if right now I just open up the terminal and run this line of codes, right there we can see that we have a list of names that we have created. Okay, so this is a list, and we use a square brackets to define it, and each item is separated by a comma. So when we run this, it prints Sarah, Ali, and Alex as the items inside that list that we have created. So right now, we created a list with 3 items, Sarah, Ali, and Alex, and we can think of it as a box that holds multiple values like 3 names. Okay, so now let's say we want to access a specific name like the first one or the middle one. How we can do that? Dart lists are zero based, meaning the first item is at position 0, okay? So if we want just to access the first name from all the names that stores inside our list, what we can do? So this is the way that we can do such a thing. Here we just call the list name, and inside the square brackets we have just to give it an index of our items inside the list. And as I mentioned before, Dart lists are zero based, meaning the first item is at position of 0. So if I give it a position 0, index 0, I mean I want the first item inside our list. How we can count items in a list? We have to start counting from 0. For example, Sarah position is 0, Ali is 1 and Alex is 2. We're not going to count from 1. We're going to count them from 0. So inside the names, when we call a list name, okay, we have to define the position of that item that we want to print or that we want to access to. Okay, so right now if I want to access Sarah, I have to give it a number of Sarah inside that list, and that is 0. So if I run this code, but first of all, let's open up the terminal, and if I right now run this code, we can see that Sarah is printed out, and that's pretty cool. Also, you can find out how many items are in a list by using the length method in the Dart SDK. So what is the use case of that method? Imagine that we have a very large list of items, and we just want to figure out how many items are actually stored there. Okay, so in this case, we have to fetch the count of items inside our list, and we can do that using a function, a built-in function in Dart called length. For example, if I just wanted to print the names.length right here, if I open up the terminal, we can see that we have 3 items inside our list. So now let's add something to the list. Okay, so we can add something to the list by a method called add, and that's pretty simple. Let's delete all of these codes, and just here right now at this phase of code, if I'm going to print my list, okay, what we see here, we just see that we have 3 items inside our list: Sarah, Ali, and Alex. Also, we can add some items or one item to our list by a function called add. How we can do that? We just have to call our list using get name. So I'm just going to say name.add, and names.add, and inside that add function, we can add the value or the item we want to our existing list. Okay, so here I'm going to add, for example, I don't know, maybe Dora, and if I'm going to print my list again, so this is the phase 1, and now in phase 2, if I'm going to print the list of our names, we can see that Dora has been added successfully to our list. So let's save the changes, open up the terminal, and just run this code. And you can see at the first phase, we just have Sarah, Ali, and Alex. But at the second phase, we have Dora added to our list successfully. And we can see that our list incremented by 1 item, and the last item is Dora that had been added from the add function inside our Dart SDK, and that's pretty simple and pretty awesome, right? And also, we can remove an item like this. So here, at the phase 3, for example, if we want to separate our code inside 3 phases, at the phase 3, I'm just going to call our list names.remove, and right now I have just to give it the index of that item inside my list or inside our list. And for example, if I give it the index of 0, we can see that Sarah is going to be deleted from our list. And right now, if I save the changes and also print my names list, save the changes, open up the terminal, and run the code, we can see that right now we have Sarah, Ali, and Alex, and after that we have added Sarah, Ali, Alex, and Dora. But right there in the phase 3, we have removed Sarah from the list, right? So let's just see what we have here. We have removed, we have to call a function called remove at. Okay, so when we call the remove at, we mean, like you see here in the description of Visual Studio Code, that says it's gonna remove the object at position or index from the list. This method reduces the length of this by 1 and moves all later objects down by 1 position and return the removed value. Okay, so if we just call remove add, we can add the position or the index of that item to be removed from our list. But if we're going to use the remove function, it's going to take the exact item and going to remove the exact item. So we have to write Sarah, not the position of Sarah, inside our existing list, and that is the main difference. Okay, so here if we just going to add 0 and run our code after opening up the terminal, we can see right there that we have Sarah, Ali, Alex, and Sarah, Ali, Alex, Dora. Okay, and that's pretty cool. So here we have a warning: int isn't related to string. Try changing the argument or element type to match. Oh guys, I'm so sorry, I forgot to reverse it back to remove at, and actually it still is at remove, not remove at function. And if we're going to run it again, I'm so sorry for that, we can see that in the first phase we have Sarah, Ali, and Alex, the items inside our list, and at the phase number 2, we have added Dora to our existing list. Okay, so when we print it out, we can see that we have Sarah, Ali, Alex, and Dora. But at the phase 3, we have removed the first or the 0 position or the 0 index item inside our list. So we can see that Sarah has been removed successfully, and we have just 3 items left, and the items are Ali, Alex, and Dora. And that was pretty cool and awesome. And one more thing, that we can even make lists that only accept a certain type. For example, we want to create a list that only accept certain types. For example, right now, if I'm going to, instead of Dora, if I'm going to add a number like 2, we can see here that we have an error that says the argument type int can be assigned to the parameter type string. Okay, why is this happening? Because the add function just accept the string values. Okay, so we cannot add it directly, but we can add it actually hard coded to our list, and we can add, for example, 2 to our list. And right now, if I'm going to open up the terminal and see the changes, we can see that we have an item called 2 in our list. Okay, but if we want to have restriction here and just allowing string items to be added to our list, we can define it like this. Okay, so we can define a list and give it a type of string. And right now, when we define a list and give it a type of string, okay, that means this list only accepts string items, and we cannot add any other items to our list. And that is pretty good. Now, Dart note this list that can only hold strings. If you try to add a number like here or a boolean, it gives you an error, and that error actually is the element type int can be assigned to the list type string, and that error is pretty obvious and understandable. So yeah, lists are super useful, and you'll use them all the time in Dart and Flutter. So in the next video, we'll take lists to the next level, and we're going to use some loops, filtering, mapping, and more. So let's keep building. Alright, welcome back. In this video, we're going to talk about the lists in Dart. I think we're going to continue our conversation in lists, and we're going to figure out what actually are the lists. In this video, we're going to talk about the part 2 of the list data type. And so we have to cover again what was the list, and actually a list was just a collection, and we have to think of it like a box that holds multiple values, not just one. So here we have an example. That we actually created a list called names, and inside our list we have 3 items, or it's better to say that we have 3 names: Sarah, Tom, and Alex. So if we want to see what actually inside our lists that are called names, we have to print it. We have to print our list, and if we run our application, you can see here in the terminal that we have a list called Sarah, Tom, and Alex. But actually this is a list. Okay, so right now we see that this is a list. we use square brackets to define it, and each item is separated by a comma. Okay, so actually when we want to define a list, we use a square brackets like you see here, and we add the items inside our list and we separate them by a comma. So, and like you saw here, when we run our application, we can see the exact the exact shape of our list in the terminal that have been printed, exactly like this. Alright, okay, so I think right now everything is clear, but now let's figure out a scenario. Let's say that you want to access a specific name or a specific item, like the first one inside our list. So Dart lists are zero based, meaning the first item is at the position or at the index of 0. So what does that mean? For example, let's figure out, I just want to print Sarah. What can I do? Okay, so inside our list, if I wanted to access Sarah, so the first item of our list is this. Okay, and we told you that Dart lists are zero based, meaning the first item is at position or index of 0. So if we want to access the first item, we have to give it the position or index of 0. So right now, if I run our code, we can see that right now we're accessing the first item, and that is Sarah. Pretty cool. What about if we want to access the second item? We have to give it the position of 1. Why? Because the first one was 0, position of 0 or index of 0. So the second item will be the position of 1 or index of 1. And if I save the changes and run the code, we can see that right now we're accessing Tom. So what about if we want to access multiple specific values inside a list? What we have to do here, for example, if I copy this and print it here and change the index from 0 to 1 and run our code again, you can see that right now I'm accessing Sarah and Tom, the two values from all of these three values inside our list. So actually, we have another way to access specific values inside our list, not all of them, and you can also find out how many items are in the list actually, and I think we covered it in the previous section. We can just call the names.length method, and using it we can see how many items do we have inside our list, and actually printed the 3, and that means right now we just have 3 values. Cool. It's cool, right? So now that you know what a list is and how to use it, it's time to learn how to loop through a list. Why do we even need to loop? Well, imagine you have a list of names and you want to print each one, okay? So in this scenario, or maybe change something in them, okay? You don't want to do this manually. You don't want to actually access all of the names by the position or by their index manually and one by one, because it's actually not effective, not efficient, and it costs a lot of time, okay? So you don't want to do this manually. That's just painful. So here actually where looping comes. So the for loop, we can actually use a loop called for inside a list to iterate inside all of the items that we have in our list. So let's see how we can do that. Let's use a simple for loop and see how we can do this. Okay, so in this section we're actually going to introduce you with for by a very useful example. So here let's actually create a for loop. Here I'm going to use for, and I'm going to create a variable called I, give it a default value of 0, and I'm going to say if I, which right now holding the default value of 0, is less until it's less than the length of the items inside our lists, okay, what we have to do is just incrementing the I. So that means here, and then we're going to print the names, the list that we have created, but with the index of I. So let's see what will happen. If I run the code, right now we're accessing all the items and we iterate through our list that we have created using a for loop, and we actually right now we have access to all of the items one by one inside our list, and that is pretty cool, guys. So here inside our for loop, I created and defined a variable called I with a default value of 0, and I've been set that until the I is less than the names.length, that is actually 3, because we have 3 items inside our list. You have to increment 1 for each iteration of this for loop. For example, it's 0 right now, and we know that the names.length is 3. So right now 0 is less than 3. So we increment it. It's going to be 1, and we print the name at the index of 0. Okay, but right now it was incremented, so the value is actually right now 1. And for the second iteration, it's going to check. Okay, so the value of I is 0. Okay, is 1, like you see here, and the 1 is less than 3. So 1 is less than 3. Let's increment it. It's going to be 2, and we have to print the name that hold the position of 1. Okay, so right now you can see that Tom is going to be printed, and after that you can see so that this is 2, and the for loop is going to check. So okay, the variable I is 2, so 2 is less than 3, and it's going to increment it. It's going to be 3, and here we're going to print the name of the position, the item inside our names list at the position of 2. So this is the first position 0, this is the position 1, and this is the position 2. It's going to print the Alex for us, like you see here in the terminal, right? And after that, it's going to check. So I now is 3. Does I less than I, which is actually 3, less than names.length, where actually it is also 3, so this condition is not true, so the for loop will not going to be executed and it will be over. Okay, so actually if I just here going to print the I, you can see it very cool, and like you see here, we have Sarah at the index of 0, we have Tom at the index of 1, and we have Alex at the index of 2. And at the last iteration in this for loop, when we increment the I value and it reach the 3, so 3 is not less than 3, and the iteration for the 3 will not execute it at the line of 6, and we're not going to have any error because we cannot access the position 3 or index 3 inside our names list, because we also have 3 items and the counting of our items is 0 based. And if you wanted to make it more clear, we can define it like this. So we can just say for a variable called name, in names, we can just print the name. Okay, so right now instead of I'm using name, and I'm going to say name in names that we have inside our list, just print them one by one. And if you see here, so this is string data types, and inside our names list we have a list of strings, so it's totally fine to work with strings inside numbers, or the previous way that we've done to access all of the items inside our list and iterate inside them. Also, we can use for each method. How we can do this? Let's delete all of them and see. Actually here we can use names dot for each. That means for each name, but let's define it like this and just say that for each name inside our list, we have to print our name. This is a very useful way and very classic and short way to use the iteration and loop inside a list. So if I run our code, we can see that right now we're accessing Sarah, Tom, and Alex, but we can do it by another way using the for each method, and we can just call our list and use the for each method, and here we can define it like this, and instead of element we can use name, and here we just can print the name. So if I run our code, you can see that right now we still have an access to Sarah, Tom, and Alex. Hey, welcome back to another video. Today we're talking about two really useful collection types in Dart: sets and maps. They might look like a little like lists, but they have their own rules and their own superpowers. So first up, let's talk about the sets. What is a set? Set is like a list, but it does not allow the duplication, and the order of items doesn't matter. So let's see an example. Here, let's create a void called main, and inside our void main function, or inside our main function, let's declare a variable called numbers and give it a value like, I don't know, maybe actually 1, 2, and 3. So let's add 1, 2, 3, and 3. So we know that if we're going to use list, the duplication is allowed. But how about if we want to use sets? Okay, so here, let's define the type. So here I'm going to define the type and say that these numbers are integers, so I define the type for them. And here, if I'm going to print the numbers variable that we have defined here, we can see a very amazing thing. So look what happens. If I move my cursor to the variable number, it's set that the data type of this variable is set, and all the types of this variable, of this set variable, are integers. Why? Because we defined it. We told that we want to have a set with these values, and type of all of these values are int. So what will happen if we print the numbers variable? So let's test it out and see what happens. If I open up the terminal, we can see we have 1, 2, 3, but the values that we have defined are 1, 2, and double 3. So what actually happened here? Here we have a warning. 2 elements in a set literal shouldn't be equal. Change or remove the duplicate elements. So this is the main difference between the list and sets. Lists allow duplications, but on the other hand, the sets in Dart programming language does not allow the duplication. So see, even though we add 1 and 2 more than once, the set removed the duplication automatically. So, but sorry, in this example we have added just once, but if we add 1 and also 2 more than once and run our application, we can see again we also have printed the 1, 2, 3. So actually this is it. We use the curly braces and angle brackets to tell the Dart this is a set of integers. So here we use the curly braces and add some values or some items in it, and like this we can define a set in Dart. And if you want to declare a type or a data type for our set, we can actually just define or use an angle bracket, and inside the angle brackets we can define the data type that we want to tell the Dart this set is of this data type. So in this case, we use the int to tell the Dart that we have a set, we have a variable called number, which is set because we use curly braces, and we, before declaring the curly braces and the items inside them, we use the angle brackets to define the type of our set. And right now we're telling Dart that we have a variable called numbers of type int, and this is a set that include these numbers. And if we want to print it out, we can see that we have just 1, 2, and 3, and we can't see the duplication values, and this is very useful. So we can define a set in another way. So let's see how we can define it in another way. So we can just define a set instead of variable. Instead of create a variable and use the var key or var keyword, we can use set. Okay, and inside, after the set, we use the angle brackets, define the data type of our set. In this case, we're going to define a string. So right now we're telling Dart that we have a set of strings, and here we have to choose a name for our set. So I'm just going to use, for example, names, and give it a value with the curly braces and say, okay, I have Alex, I have Mary, and for example Taha. So I declare them, and right now if I wanted to print the names that we have here and just run my application, I can see I have Alex, Mary, Taha. This is also exactly like the values that we have defined here because we do not have any duplication inside our set. But if I wanted to duplicate a name and just use Taha twice, and if we use any name twicely and run our application, we can see that the duplication value automatically gonna be removed, and this is the result. Pretty cool and straightforward. Okay, so actually we have some functions, some built-in functions in Dart for the sets, and we can add, remove, check if something exists like this. For example, here for the names, we can tell Dart that we have a set called names, that we define it in the line 3, so we can say that names, please add another name for us. So we cannot add an integer. Why? Because we have an error, and that error says the argument type int can be assigned to the parameter type string. Why? Because here inside these angle brackets, we have defined that this set only accepts the string data types. Okay? So here, if I wanted to add a value or an item inside my set with another data type, my names set does not going to accept it. Okay, so I think everything is clear right now. But if I wanted to add a name, for example, I want to add a name called Sam, and here if I going to just run my code, you can see that we have Sam added to our set successfully without any problem. But if I wanted to duplicate it and run my application, we can see that line 5 does not affect my set because this is a set and we do not allow the duplication values. So here in the line 6 also we have another function, another very useful function, guys, and that is remove. For example, names.remove. Let's say that we want to remove Alex from our list. So here, if I run my application, we can see Alex is no longer exist, and we only have Mary, Taha, and Sam because we added in the line 4, and Taha is a duplicate value, so it's going to be removed automatically. And in the line 5 we have added Sam twice, and we use set, so twice items does not have any meaning in set, so it's going to be automatically removed. And the result is Mary Taha Sam, which is pretty cool and amazing. Also, we have a function that checks if a value or an item is already exists inside our sets or not. How we can check that? Here, actually we can print it, or we can create a Boolean variable. For example, is Mary exists, and let's actually give it a value, and the value is names, which is the name of our set, and we're going to use a function called contains and pass it the value. Actually our value is Mary, so here I'm going to add Mary, and this going to check and return a boolean for us, and this boolean value we're going to be returned is stored in a variable called isMaryExist. So if I just going to print the isMaryExist, we can see the result. So right now, if I'm going to run my application, I can see that true, Mary is exist in our list. On the other hand, if I change Mary to Y, we can, and run our application, we can see that the value that been returned is false because the Mary with Y is not exist actually. So that was all about the set. So let's go and cover the map. What actually are the maps? This is what we're going to cover in the next section, so stay tuned. Okay guys, let's talk about a map. What is a map? This is our question, so let's go and find the answer. A map is a collection of key value pairs. Think of it like a mini database. Each piece of data has a key, like a label, and a value. Here's how it looks. So let's define a map. How we can define it? We create a variable called user, and this user is a map, okay? So we're going to define it with curly braces and give it a key value pairs. So the key is name, okay? So our key is name, and the value of our key is going to be, for example, I don't know, maybe Taha. All right. So I define a map called user, and inside it, we define the values with the key value pairs. And a map, I told you before, a map is a collection of key value pairs. So this can be a collection, not only one key value pair. So actually, I have added one key value pair, and this is, the key is name, and the value of that key is Taha, okay? So we can add a collection of them. For example, I can add another detail inside my user map. For example, I can add a key called age and give the value like, for example, my age, 21. And also, I can create another key value pair because I told you, and I'm going to repeat it again, this is a collection of key value pairs. And actually here I can define a Boolean key value pairs, and I can say, so I have a key called is a student, and the value of it is true. So I'm always a student, and here I add the semicolon and separate all the key value pairs collection with the comma. Also, one of the most important things here is that we can access the values by their key. It's super useful for structured data, so we can also add or change the values. But how we can access the values inside our map by their key? So here's too many built-in function in Dart that we can use them. For example, let's say that I want just to access the name of my user. So imagine that we have a database of our users, and I want to access my first user, the name of my first user, the username of my first user. So how I can achieve this? Here, I'm going to print that I want to access a map user. So first of all, let's just print our map, okay? So I'm going to, so this is not sorted very well. So here, I'm just going to print my map. So like you see here, we have name Taha, age 21, and is a student, true, so Taha is a student, but I don't want that. I want to just, inside our database, inside my database, I just want to access the username, not all of the data that's stored in my database, in my map. How we can access a specific value using the key value pairs inside our map. So, for example, I just wanted to access the name of my user. Here, we can just say user, and inside this, we have to add the key that we want to access the value of it. And here I'm going to say I want to access the name of my user map. And if I'm going to print it again, we can see that we just have an access to Taha, where it is a name of my user inside my user map. And also we can do the same way for another properties, for another key value pairs, for example, like age, or I can print the is student. And if I'm going to run, I can see that right now I'm accessing all of these values. So I think there is something wrong. And if I run it again, we can see I have an access to Taha, 21, and is student true is at the after the exit. Why? Actually, I don't know why this is happening, so let's just add it here and test my application again. We can see that it fixed and we have Taha true and 21 instead of printing all of the key value pairs in our map. So this is very useful, guys. And also we can add or change values like this. For example, the name right now is Taha, but I can change it. For example, I can say that user map have a value called name. I want to retrieve it and change it to another value. For example, Alex, from Taha to Alex, and I can do it like this. And if I'm going to just print the name again here and remove the other data, I can see that here first the value of my username, the value of the name key inside my user map is Taha, but here at the line 5 I change it to Alex. And actually, like you see here, when I'm going to print the username for the second time, I can see the name key, the name value of name key is actually changed successfully. Also, we can loop through maps like this. We can loop and retrieve all the data that we want, and this is just as easy as possible. Like you see here, we can just call the map name and just use the for each function and just tell Dart that we have, actually here we have inside the for each, we have a key and a value. So based on this key and values, I want to print and loop through all of the key values that I have into all of the collection that I have inside of my map. And I can just say that I want to print the, for example, $, key, and I can just say that I have a key and this is the key \n, this is the value, $value. And if I run the application, we can see that we have, this is the key name, the value is Taha, this is the key age, the value is 21, and this is the key is student, and the value of this key is true. So like this, we can actually iterate or loop through the maps like this. So if we want to recap as easy as possible, we can say that list is ordered, allows the duplicates, and set is unordered, no duplicates, map is key value pairs, and we're going to use all of this a lot in real Dart and Flutter projects. So I think that's all about the list, set, and maps. And also we have covered all of the different data types, the for loops, the while, the for each, and everything that you need to getting started with Dart programming language, and maybe if you want, going into the world of mobile development using Flutter. Hey folks, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about something super important in Dart, and that is the functions and classes. So these are the tools that help us keep our code clean, organized, and also reusable. First up, what's a function? We have a question, and first of all, we have to find an answer for it. What's a function? So In simple way, a function is a block of code that does something, okay? So you give it a name, maybe some input, and it gives you an output based on the logic that you want to develop or you have been developed on this function. So here's a simple form that we want to show you. For example, I want to create a logic to create, or let's think of it like create a machine that just say hello to everyone that use that machine. Okay, so here we're going to create a function with the void keyword because those type of functions are not going to return anything for us. So the functions that are not going to return anything but just going to do something or does something for us are void functions or non-returnable functions. Okay, so here I'm creating a void function. I'm going to create a void or function of type void. That means it does not return anything for us and just does something. So let's choose a name for it. For example, I want to create a function that just say hello to us. So let's give it a name like say hello. So right now I have a function with this type that going to say hello to me or every user that uses this function. Okay, and now using these curly braces, we can define the body of our function and we can develop or determine the logic that we want to do in this function. That's very simple right now. Okay, so right now from the line 2, we'll create a function with the name say hello that does not return anything, just do something for us. And inside that function in line 3, in these curly braces, in the body of this function, we're going to tell the machine or going to tell the Dart what this function should do. So let's say that we just want to say hello to us, like the name that we have chosen for this function. Okay, so for that, I'm going to say that just print hello, and let's see what will happen. So right now I have a function say hello that going to just print hello. Everything is cool, and I don't think that we have some complicated thing. So let's see how we can use this function. Now we have to call it. How we can call a function? Just like this. We have to call the name of this function. And now if we run our code, we can see that in the terminal we have hello printed out. Okay, so if you see here, right now we just have a function called say hello, and inside that we're going to print the hello. And at the line 6, we just call the function, and what we have defined here in the body of this function will be triggered. Okay, so guys, this is one of the too many types of function that we have here in Dart. Right? So this function is with no parameters, but also we have a type of functions with parameters. That means we can add some parameters to them and do or actually define a logic inside them based on the input or on the parameters that we have defined on this function when we declare a function. So how we can do it? So this is the first type of our function, first type of our function, and this is no parameters. Okay, so we have another type. Let's just copy this command and paste it here. We have our second type of our functions, and this is with parameters. So how we can define those kind of functions in Dart programming language? So let's say that we want to have a function. So we're going to say we have void. Let's give it a name like greet. And here inside this parenthesis, we're going to define a parameter. Okay, and that is, for example, a string name. Why? Let's imagine that we want to create a function that say hello to the username Okay, so we have too many users and we want to say hello to the users by their name. So we want, or we have to have a parameter that received the name of our users, and then when the function received the name from our users, after that he can just say hello to the users based on their name, so it feels like more realistic. Okay, so let's see how we can and define something like that. So here we define the parameters. We can define one or more parameters. There is no limitations actually. And here inside those curly braces in the body of our functions, we can say hello to the users based on their name. For example, let's say print, and inside the print function, we're going to say hello there $, and the name that we have received from our function as a parameter. Okay, so these are the type of functions that called with parameters functions. Okay, so here what we have to do, we have to call this function to trigger whatever it does, whatever we defined inside the body of our function, and we can do it just like that, just we've done before for the say hello function. We just have to call the actually the greet function, and as you see here, we have an error. Why? Because we have to give it an input, give it a value from string data type with name parameters. Okay, so we have to give it a name. The function will receive our name and actually applies the logic that we have defined in the body of our functions inside these curly braces at the line 8. Okay, so let's give it a name from string data type, and let's give it, for example, my name, that is Taha. And here, if I just run our code, we can see that we have hello dear Taha. So like you see here, we have defined a parameter, and when I call my function, I just added an input, give it a value as a parameter, and then the logic of my functions applies to the input that I gave to this function. Okay, so these are a type of functions with no return value. If you want the function to give you back something, use return. So how we can use return? First of all, we do not have to use void anymore. We have to define the data type of the value that we have to be returned from our function, and then return it with the return keyword. Let's see how we can do it in action. So here we have another type of functions that, let's say, functions with return values. And here, let's say that we want to create a function that returns an integer value, for example, a result of a multiplication. And here we have to define an int, the data type or the return value data type for this function, and give a function a name. Like you see here, we have created a void greet because we do not want to return any value from this function, but in this function we want to return a value. So the data type of that value is going to be int, and then we have to give the function a name, for example, add or multiplication, or I don't know, anything that you want to give it as a name. So let's just add a name, for example. The name of this function is going to be add, and this function is going to add numbers. So we have to give it two parameters, for example, the first number and second number, and this function is going to add them together. So this is the name of my function, and we have to define the parameters for this function. For example, int a and another int b. I told you before, we can add one or as many as we need parameters to each function. There's no limitation, and in this case I just added two parameters as integers to this function because we want to add them together. For example, let's add 3 and 7, and the result obviously is going to be 10, and we want to return that 10 as a result from this function called add with the int data type as the return value. So here we're going to define the body of our function, and we have to use the return keyword because we want to return a value as a result from our functions, not just to do some kind of logics and see the result. We want to return a value and use that value in other functions, for example. And obviously here we can return A plus B. Amazing. And now we can use this function to return a value and maybe store that value. Let's see how we can store them. So let's just comment these out, and here I'm going to create a variable called, for example, I don't know, a variable called result, and give it a value. And let's just think of it like this. We have a variable called result, or we have an int variable called result with the value of 12. Okay, so let's just print the result of this value. Let's run our code and see what will happen. Okay, we have 12 printed out. Amazing. Right now, we know that this greet function will not return any value for us. Let's see if we give the greet function here as a value to the result variable of type int. Let's see what will happen. So here I'm going to just say greet. We have an error. This error said this expression has a type of void. Like you see here, this expression has a type of void, so its value can't be used. Try checking to see if you're using the correct API. There might be a function or a call that returns void. So why is this happening? Why we have this error? Because this type of functions, I mean the void functions, does not return any value to us. Okay, so here when we use the greet is a void function, non-returnable value function, and we cannot return any value and store it in the result. We cannot receive any value like, for example, 12 from this function and then give it to a variable called result with the type of int. But here at the line 13, we have a function called add, and this function receives two properties, and based on the parameters that this function receives, it returns a value with the type of int. So after returning this value, we can assign this function to a variable with the same type. Here we have a variable called result with the type of int, and here we have a function that receives two parameters and also return a value with the type int. So if we assign the value of this variable called result to a function named add, we can receive a value from this function and assign it to a variable called result. So here, if I'm going to call the add function and give it the two values, like, I don't know, I want to add two numbers together and then store the result into a variable called result with a type of int. So here, if I give it two inputs or two parameters that we defined in the add function here, for example, int a and b, I can add 12 and also 12, so the result will be 24, and this result will be returned from the add function and will be stored at the result variable. So here at line 18, if I'm going to print the result function, the result variable, we can see that here. Actually, let's run our code. And if we open up the terminal, we can see that we have 24, the result of our add function with the two inputs that we have defined, two 12s, and the result will be 24, because A right now is 12 and B is also 12. Okay, and we can change the numbers, give any integer values. For example, if I change it to 10 and 14 and run the code, we can see here the result is also 24. So let's change it to, I don't know, maybe this numbers, and by going to run our code, we can see that we have the result of 338 because this is the addition of 14 and 324. So amazing. And one last thing that we have to pay attention on, we have a type of function called arrow functions. What actually are the arrow functions? For short functions, Dart lets you write it like this. We do not have to define a block of body using curly braces for our functions and something like that. We just have to define them at one line and it will work without any problem. So here at the line 19, I'm going to define an arrow function. How we can define it? First of all, we have to define that this function will work or return what kind of data types. For example, we want a square function that squares the numbers, so we want to return the integer values. So let's give it a data type of int. So we have a function with the int data type called square, and it should receive one parameter, and that is the number that we want to square it. And after that, we use the arrow just like this, and this is instead of defining a body. Instead of defining a body like this, we're going to use an arrow to define our body of the function. Okay, so here after the arrow, what we'll be going to write is be the logic for this function. Okay, so here I want to receive a parameter or an input from the user that is an integer called x, and we want to square it. How we can do it? We can just multiply the received number to itself. And right now we have a function with one parameter that receives a number, and then it will be squared. So I think this is just a shortcut for simple one-line functions. So let's see the result. If I'm going to use the maybe let's just cut it, paste it at the line of 17, and here instead of add, let's use the square function and give it just a number, for example 5, and we know that result will be 25. So if I run our code, we can see here we have 25 printed out. Pretty cool. So that was all about the one-line functions or the arrow functions. And also we have anonymous functions or lambdas. What are these? You can even write functions without names. That means we do not have to define a name for our functions, and the function will be triggered and run successfully. How we can do it? Actually here, let's define a list of type variable, or let's define a variable called list and give it a value like, I don't know, maybe 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so right now we have a variable called list, and this is the value. So our list variable is a type of int, or it's better to say it's a list of type int. So it's very cool. And now here we want to define a function without any name, or anonymous functions, or also maybe called lambdas. So how we can define this function and applies it on the list variable that we have defined here. So we use the list, the name of our variable, and call the for each method, and we're going to say and this is our anonymous function. We're going to say for each item that we have here, look, this is from the line 22, our anonymous function will be started. So here we're going to say for the items inside our list, just for example go and print the item. So here we have an input for our function, and inside this curly braces we have our body of our function. But in this function from line 22 to line 24, we do not have defined any data type and also any name for it. But this function will going to work successfully without any problem. So this kind of functions are called anonymous functions or lambdas. So let's see what will happen here. Let's print ours. Comment the print function and also the result variable, and here let's just run our code and see what will happen. Like you see here, let me run again. We can see that we have printed 1, 2, 3, and those numbers are all the objects that we have stored inside our list or inside our variable called list. Also, we can change it, for example, to my list. And here we're going to say my list, and if I run our code again, we can see that we have all the item printed out. Very amazing. Alright, let's talk about something powerful in Dart, the classes. So far we worked with it simple types like int, string, lists, and booleans, maps, and etc. But sometimes you need to create your own custom type, something that models a real-world project, like a user, like, I don't know, a car or a book. So that's where classes comes in. Like always, as our routine at each section, let's ask ourselves a very straightforward question, and that is, what's a class? So, think of a class like a blueprint. It defines what something is and what it can do. For example, we have to define, let's imagine that we want to create a software for cars. So we have to define what actually a car is and what a car can do inside our application or in the real world. So here's where classes comes in. Let's say, in this example, let's say we want to create a person in Dart, so that person has a name and an age, and maybe they can introduce themselves, okay? So here's how we can model that in Dart. So if we want to create a class outside the main function, we have to create another class, okay? So how we can create a class? Just use the class keyword as easy as possible. We're going to use class keyword, choose a name like person, and after that define a body that inside this body we can do, or we can actually develop our logic, whatever we want. Use variables, functions, and everything that we want to simulate something, for example the person. So here inside those curly braces we're going to define what actually our class is going to do. So we said that we want to create a person, and the person has a name and an age, and maybe he have an option to introduce themselves, okay? So we said that the person has a name, so we have to give it a property called name of type string. And also we said the user or the person maybe have an age, so we're going to define an integer and give it a name like age. These two are properties of our person class. That means whenever a user or our software wants to work with a person object, he must define a name and an age for each person to have an access to work or use the person objects inside our software, okay? So right now we need to define a constructor. What actually a constructor is? Actually, the constructor runs when you create a new person and it sets their names and their age, okay? We will cover this section more in this video later on. So first of all, let's create our constructor, and we'll use our constructor, and For creating the constructor, we need to use the name of our class, in this case person, and then define that every developer or everyone that wants to use this class should and must define properties like name and another property called age. Okay, so with the constructor, we're going to define, or we're going to add a condition that everyone that wants to use the person class or create a person object inside our software, it should give it these two values: the name of type string and an age of type int. Because if we do not have any information about the name of our person or the age of our person, it's not make sense to going to create a person inside our application. Let's think of it like a car. For example, we do not have for example, we receive an order to create a car, and actually our client did not specify what color of car he wants. So how we can create that car if we do not know the color of it? So actually it's not possible. Okay, we cannot give him a transparent car. So in this case, the constructors comes in and we create a constructor to make a condition or force the developers or the users, when they want to create a person object, they must define these properties, the name and an age for each person, to let them create a person actually inside our software. And right now here we told you that we want to add an option that each person can actually introduce themselves. So how they can do such a thing? So here's when the methods comes in. We can define too many methods that we want inside the class. So in this case, we're going to define just one method, and we're going to use a void and give it a name like introduce. So using this function inside our person class, we should let our persons to introduce themselves. So how can they introduce themselves? Obviously using the name and the age, these two properties that we have defined in the class, in the person class. So here inside these two curly braces, in the body of our functions, inside our person class, in this function that called introduce, we're just going to use the simple print function, or we're going to say that hi, for example, I am $name, because if we want to use variable inside a string, we have to define a $sign and then the name of our variable, and using it we can actually receive the value of that variable and print it inside a string, just using $sign here. And after that, we're going to say I am name and I am age years old. Pretty cool. So let's break it down. Actually, we created a class called person that creates a new type or a new object called person, and inside the class we defined two properties: names of type string, name of type string, and age of type int. Okay, and after that we defined a constructor called person and assigned these two values, these two properties of our class, the name and the age. This constructor runs when you create a new person, and it sets their names and their age at the first to let the users or the developers to create our object from this person class. Finally, we added a method called introduce, just here at the line 8, and so this method called introduce, which just prints a little intro of our person object inside our application. And now another question: how to use this class? You can now use the person class just like any other type. How? Inside our main function, here inside the body of our main function, we have to create an object of person class with the properties that we have defined. So here I'm going to create a variable, for example, called my person, and here I'm going to create an object from my person. And like you see here, because of this constructor, it asked me to actually define a name and an age for my actually class to create a person object. Okay, so for the name I'm going to say Taha, and for age I'm going to say 21. And here we have an error because I defined the age with the type of string, and actually the type that our constructor required is int. So right now there's no problem. And after that, if I just going to say that my person, which is an instance of the person class, we have a function called introduce. I call the introduce function, and then if I run our code, we can see that we have, hi, I am Taha and I am 20 years old. Pretty cool, right? So actually we can just access each type that we want. For example, let's say that I want to see, I want to print my person dot age, for example. And if I open up the terminal and run my code, we can see that we have 21, which is the print function at line 15, that we accessed the age property from the my person object that we have been created using the person class and give it these two properties. And also we can access the name just like this, and you can see that we have Taha, we have an access to it. And at the line 16, we call the introduce function here, just like this in the person class. And right now, actually, we can run this function inside our class, and the result will be printed out here. Okay, that was all about the classes. But what about if I not give it a property, like a name to it, and just define an age? We have an error that says the argument type int can be assigned to the parameter string, because the first parameter that we have defined here is name. And right now Dart thinks that actually I'm going to define a name 21, not the age, and it says that so this is an integer value and you cannot assign it to a string value for the name. Okay, but what about if I not give any value? Here we have another error that says to positional argument expected by person, but 0 found. Try adding the missing arguments. And the error is obvious. It told us that you have to define two properties, two parameters to create a new person object, but 0 found. You do not give anything for this person constructor to create a person object using the person class that we have defined. But using this, we can create a person object, assign the value to a variable, and then we can run our functions inside those classes, or just access a specific type of variable that we have defined as a property inside our class. So actually right now here in the void function, we created a new person using person constructor. Then we called the introduce method on that person, and we saw the result. So why is this useful? Because in real apps we deal with lots of complex data. Let's say you want to build a contacts app. So each contact has a name, phone number, and maybe profile picture. So you don't want to use just map of, for example, type string in dynamic and all over places. So it gets messy, and instead you can define classes just like this that we have defined. It will be very cleaner and very easier to use. And obviously that was all about the classes. So if we want to have a quick recap, we can say that functions help you reuse the code and organize the logic, and classes helps you group related data and behaviors together. So alright, that was all about the classes. We have covered the functions and also the classes in the previous sections, and I think that's all. I hope you like it, and see you in the next video. Alright, that's it for this session. We went through the basics of Dart classes, basics of Dart, how to define them, create objects, and make your code more organized and reusable. This video is dedicated to my memory of my dear friend, always in my thoughts. I'd really love to know what kind of topics you'd like me to cover next, so feel free to share your ideas in the comments, and thanks for sticking around, and see you in the next one.